Welcome to the definitive guide to DPA ads on Facebook. A lot of folks know these ads as easy ways to get retargeting going, but they're actually missing some very core competencies around it and some amazing opportunities like how to use it to do market research. Also, what are your audience requirements to really make this scale? And why does this actually super help our one campaign strategy? This is one of the core elements of what to do in the one step beyond one campaign. And if you're running any sort of store with more than 4 or 5 SKUs in it and you're not using DPA ads, I urge you to give it a shot. Now, it's not always the best for every single advertiser. It's not always the best for every single brand, but if you haven't tried it yet, this is untapped markets for you where you can be making really easy money and cash flow, especially if you're super high ticket and especially if you have a lot of SKUs. With that being said, let's dive into this. And before we get started, I just want to say this. I know you can be literally anywhere in the world right now, and I really appreciate you taking your time to be here with me today. I'm going to make sure that this is as useful and as helpful to you as possible. If you have any questions with the stuff, please feel free to write down in below what they are, and I will get back to you. Also, read the description of this. There's an insanely helpful article, and there are links down below to the Facebook Ads MBA program, which is the #1 resource to teach you how to be more than just a media buyer, but actually a brand building CMO that will give you the strength, skills, and abilities with framework and repeatable systems and process to take just about any brand that can succeed to a place far above and beyond anywhere that you might be able to get it without. And also, don't forget to sign up for the newsletter at newsletter.facebookdisruptor.com to make sure that you see helpful information in your inbox on a weekly basis. There's so much more in there, but we'll not try to drive all of that. Go down, ring the bell, subscribe. Let's get started. So, we all know and love DPA ads as, you know, what we ultimately end up using to do retargeting often, right? And we know it from that resource, and to be fair, that's a great use case of it. But when we are doing retargeting with DPA ads, we also have to remember that we need to understand what the right audience is. And we could also go broad with it, what we call DABA, dynamic ads for broad audiences. So there's a lot of applications here. That being said, let's dive into understanding what audiences you should actually use and what those requirements really are for this to be meaningful to you at all in the first place. First thing we need to understand is what is the level of investment that we're willing to make in running our DPA ads. Is it 20 bucks a day? Is it 1,000 a day? Is it 10% of our budget? Is it 50% of our budget? We also need to understand something else. What does success look like? And are we going to be able to use this audience in a way where we're going to be able to leverage machine learning because we're getting out of the learning phase? Or ultimately, are we using this retargeting audience primarily to push cash flow, even though we're not able to necessarily leave the learning phase, but because strategically that audience is so effective for us, we can still get good results? Those are all really great questions, and you need to have the answers to those questions before you get started. So let's break down the #1 thing. What audience should we run this against anyway? Well, the easiest answer is go view content last 7 days and see what happens. Now, that's going to be helpful, maybe, hopefully, and that's a decently educated guess. But there's there's much better ways of looking at this and a lot more information that you should be looking at. First off, let's try to understand what the CPMs are going to be at our DPA. Let's say it's $50 CPMs. Okay. Now let's say we're willing to spend $100 on a DPA ad. Okay. That means we are likely to see 2,000 impressions. Okay. Now let's say that we are ultimately gonna see a good result around a baseline of 2 impressions per day per user. That's a decent expectation in a retargeting audience. All right. So that means on a daily basis, we have enough money to realistically reach about 1,000 people. Okay. Now, we also know that at best, If you get extreme saturation and a really high frequency, maybe you're going to reach 50% of any target audience. Okay. That means in order to reach an audience of 1,000 people 2 times with your $100 a day budget, you're going to need an audience that's at least 2,000 individuals. Good to know. Now, how do we determine what that audience even looks like? Well, you can go in and guess, or you can go into your events manager and start to play around with parts of the funnel and timelines. You can get up to 28 days worth of information, and if it's longer than that, you can extrapolate the information. But let's just say, what is the add to carts over the last week? Now, it's probably not unique, but if add to carts over the last week is 300 people, you can pretty much guarantee that there's no way you're going to be able to use an add to cart audience with any recency of a month or less with a DPA ad. There's just not enough people. Now, maybe you can get 50, 60 bucks a day and you get a couple sales out of it, but you're going to be hammering a lot of people with your ads that don't want to buy. Remember, the vast majority of people in a retargeting audience are not going to convert. Let's say it's a 10% conversion rate and there's 1,000 people in that audience. That means 900 people have no interest in your product. That means that if you are reaching, say, 400 or 500 people a day, and let's say it's 500, 450 of those people, 900 out of those 1,000 impressions are bad. Let's use a real world example. If you've shown an interest in, say, a vacuum cleaner, and then for the next month, a vacuum cleaner salesman comes to your door twice a day to try to sell you. By like day 2 or 3, you're going to hate that person. How many people do you think hate your brand right now? Do you think that's ultimately helpful for your relationship with Facebook as an advertiser? Yeah, you're making sales, but is that really a good thing? Long term, is the upside of revenue offsetting the damage that is being done? I'd say probably no. So we need an audience that's much larger than that. And also, if I added to cart 27 days ago, and I haven't added to cart ever since, and you've been knocking on my door twice a day, do you think that I'm going to change my mind all of a sudden? Answer's probably no. Plus, I'm probably also seeing you're targeting your ads in broad targeting if I have any interest in the brand. So that recency also plays a pretty big part. How many days are you willing to bother somebody incessantly after they already tell you no? What if this was dating? Do we live in a world where you think that when somebody says no, please stop, your best thinking is to bother them repeatedly, multiple times a day for weeks on end until they change their mind? But that's the theory behind basically all retargeting on Facebook. So when we use retargeting with DPA ads, we have to get above and beyond that. Let's assume that $50 CPM and $100 budget. And again, these are just very round numbers. Yours might be very different. I've seen DPA ads as low as $20 CPMs and as high as 100, right? I've used it on budgets that are $20 a day and as high as a couple thousand. So just using round numbers here. So instead, maybe our focus should be, let's find an audience that's 4,000 or 5,000 people with a little bit of recency. Now we can go back to that events manager and see, well, we've got 5,000 view contents in the last week. Let's use that. Those aren't necessarily unique pixel events. What if somebody views your product multiple times or multiple products? A great way to decipher this is using your Google Analytics or site insights and determine how many pages does the average person look at. Divide that view content number by that page view number, and you're going to get to some factor. Let's say an audience is 5,000 people, and the average person looks at 1.8 web pages. Let's use an easy number. Let's say it's 2. Okay, then that 5,000 view content is really maybe 2,500 people. Well, let's double the timeline out to 2 weeks. Now it's roughly 5,000 people. 5,000 people. Now we're getting in a spot where we aren't bothering everybody constantly. Our frequency is probably going to be lower on a day. And because we're driving enough interactions, as people fall out of that window, new people fall in. And now we're sitting in a situation where if that works, we can also scale our budget. That's a phenomenally better situation than just saying, I'm going to do this. Now, mind you, if you have a lot of volume, for instance, I was sitting in a spot where I was getting 1,000 add to carts in a week, sometimes a day. I would go add to cart one day with DPA and I was crushing. But I was also spending like $30,000 to $50,000 a day on a brand where that was reflective of 40% of revenue. So just understand your audience requirements and the impact it has on your business, and why retargeting is not a good idea most of the time. And when it is a good idea, Broad is already doing that for you. So if you have any questions about this stuff, please write below and look down below. There's an article in here that's also going to be very, very helpful for you to understand this stuff. If you like this, please go ahead and tap like, go ahead and subscribe. If you're listening on the audio podcast, set it for download. You don't even have to listen. I'd appreciate it a lot. And if you really value this information, don't forget to sign up for the newsletter at newsletter.facebookdisruptor.com or check out the MBA program at mba.facebookdisruptor.com.